Hello buddy, yeah, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we're on the map Summer Song, playing as the forces of Vampire Counts against the forces of Clan Angrand. Now before we hop into this one, I do want to mention that as of right now, there's been a continuous bug in Quick Match for the last few days, and it's been practically impossible to get a match. CA has promised that they're working on the issue, but as of now, that has not been fixed. I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to cast because I've got a few replays I still wanted to do, but beyond that, I'm obviously relying on playing more games, and if Quick Match is not kind of operating, it's probably going to have to be through customs and that sort of thing. So I figured I should make a note of that. Hopefully it will be fixed soon. But until then, enjoy these last few games we at least have saved up. So going in against Vampire Counts, I decided to go against Clan Angrand. I decided to do, first of all, have a Lord who has Spirit Leech, because one of the most annoying things, potentially, is having to face off against a Dwarven Ancestor that you can't kill particularly efficiently. So for my Lord, I'm rolling with a Necrarch. He's pretty cheap. He's a bit cheaper, I think, than Manfred. Worse melee stats by quite a bit, but you do get Purple Son of Zerus in this case, because in case the Dawi Blob, it's a decent spell. Spirit Leech, of course, to help deal with Dwarf Ancestors. Raise Dead, Invocation of Nehek. And then we also do have Dark Protection to keep my Lord alive, Arcane Conduit for extra Winds of Magic, and even more Winds of Magic through Wild Heart as well as Life Leeching. So for lots of very potent sort of Winds of Magic generators on the Necrarch. Alongside him, for our bunker busting potential, we do have two Vargulfs. These guys are absolutely amazing against dwarves. You can just run amok through their back lines, run right through most of their infantry. And if Slayers try to catch you, you can just kind of juke around and avoid fighting them. Our front line composed here entirely of Graveguard with great weapons. There are 5 units of them, and they are all very heavily chevroned up. Some of them are only on 1 or 2 chevrons. Most of them are actually on full or 1 or 2 gold chevrons. And 3 of them here on the flank are actually on 9 chevrons total. So they're pretty insane. Their stats are actually respectable with all this chevroning. Not necessarily the most optimal usage, perhaps, but I figured, let's see how it performs against the dwarves. One of the most annoying things to deal with, of course, can be Iron Breakers, and this might give them a slightly improved chance of success. Besides that, up in the sky, we do have 4 units of Fellbats, partially to counter gyrocopters, as well as to counter enemy backlines. So, very simplistic, very blunt force build, but hopefully we'll see how they perform here. Now for my opponent, he has gone with Angrand, and he has brought an Ancestor, so not disappointing here. Ancestor Engineer, Drummer Hammerfist, and he is immediately casting Ballistics Calibration to make his cannons just a little more accurate. Actually, quite a bit more accurate and firing faster. He does, of course, has Entrenchment, as well as the Extra Powder effect, and Prospector Spyglass, which grants more accuracy. I do want to note that Extra Powder is kind of wasted on cannons, because cannons don't do explosive damage, so I think that's just kind of a bit of a mistake there, but regardless, shouldn't be too much of an impact. Besides that, there is a Rune Lord. He's got quite a few abilities on him. He does have the Master Rune of Grungni. Another big mistake against the Vampire Counts who don't have missiles. Though perhaps in this case my opponent was expecting magic missile play, against which it can prove at least a little bit resilient, help your Rune Lord or Runesmith survive a little better. He also does have the Rune of Hearth and Home, providing immunity to psychology, Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, as well as Master Rune of Negation for that protection. So it's interesting that there's no Master Rune of Oath and Steel, but he did bring the Rune of Grungni. So I do think that is a bit of a mistake. Now, besides that, we do have 2 cannons who are immediately teeing off on my poor Vargulf, so most of those shots are whiffing, and I will be dodging to attempt to prevent that any more damage coming in. 2 Bugman's Rangers here in the back line, as well as a single unit of Thunderers, do provide some additional point defense. Besides that, my opponent's front line is definitely on the cheaper end of things. Lots of Dwarf Warriors, the Equine Miners anchoring things a little bit, and there are also a single unit of Slayers here in the back. So not too much of a front line. My opponent did kind of leave his flank open here, looking to give his cannons the clearest possible shot. Not necessarily a bad play, but now those Dwarf Warriors are rushing up to take position. He also does have the Norgrimling's Ironbreaker, so I guess it's not necessarily the cheapest front line. These guys are very expensive, of course, but they will provide a very solid anchor. Meantime, the bats are gunning it right for my opponent's formation. He is trying to snipe them down with cannons, but honestly, I don't care. If you're going to snipe some bats, go for it. I really don't care. I'm not going to try to dodge or juke, but the Vargulf here is going to do his very best to evade those shots, and doing quite a good job of it. You can see we've only taken about 1 hit per Vargulf, which is honestly not bad at this stage of the game, given that my opponent already popped his abilities, and he's been trying to focus them very, very heavily. Now, in the meantime, our Graveguard with great weapons is closing the gap here, looking to get in on top of these Dwarf Warriors, as well as their supporting elements, of course. The Equine Miners, and especially the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers, are going to be pretty nasty. They do have 3 units, or never mind. It's actually 2 charges of blasting of explosives. The Equine Miners have 3. So potentially there's a lot of damage to be done there if they manage to get good connections on the Graveguard, and that's something we want to avoid. That said, as the front line pushes up here, it does mean that the poor backline is pretty much compromised, and the bats immediately dive in and start preying on these poor artillery crews with their atrocious melee stats, and they really can't hold up here. Dwarf crews obviously better than most other factions crews when it comes to defending themselves, but nonetheless, they're getting overwhelmed. My opponent here, focused on the front line, casting his Runes of Negation, looking to keep his troops in the fray, is not paying attention over here, and because of that, his Slayers are literally just dawdling here, watching their friends getting slaughtered. Can you imagine this? These are some Slayers. Like, these guys must be like the budget Slayers. They're not like really feeling the urge to die. And because of that, these Felbats get a free pick here on the cannon. In the meantime, blasting charges are demolishing my Graveyard with ray weapons alongside a Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Not much I can do about this. I kind of accepted the fact that I'm going to have a unit or two destroyed, and there's not going to be much I'm going to be able to do about it. That said, the Vargulfs actually dive into the Ecran Miners, and they tie them down, so preventing them from throwing out their blasting charges here on the Graveyard with ray weapons, which is huge, because that means these Graveguard can now decimate the Dwarf Warrior front line and hew their way through to a victory. And you can see the Dwarf Warriors really not hitting very hard in return. The Graveyard with ray weapons have very high melee defense thanks to those Chevrons. Normally they're sitting in like the 20s, but right now they're up to 36. And because of that, these guys really aren't able to hit back effectively, and the Graveyard just kind of shrugs it off and cleaves their way to through these stunties. Elsewhere, in the meantime, bats are sweeping through now. We have already lost, I do believe, a unit of bats to the Slayers, because Slayers, of course, are devastating to squishy troops. But as my opponent is pursuing the Vargulfs here, it means he's not helping out against the bats, and the bats are simply chasing the Boogman's Rangers. The Vargulfs are running amok, shutting down artillery crews, and you can see the Necrarch here bullying poor Drumar Hammerfist, who does actually hit himself with some physical resist there, but he's been getting Spirit Leech this entire game, slowly but surely removing his ability to fight. And you can see the poor Slayers here interdicted by a zombie summon. Obviously, zombies and bats are not going to do the most amazing amounts of damage, but they're going to bog them down, buy me time, and in fact, you know, they do get a little bit of hurt done here. You can see the Slayers actually losing hundreds of HP there. Not even fighting Vargulfs. So they're only fighting cheap trash here, and they are still bleeding HP. Obviously going to slaughter these zombies, going to slaughter these Felbats, but it doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm just simply buying myself time to clean up the backline, get rid of these Bogmans, or at least mess them up really badly, get rid of these Thunderers, and once they're gone, my opponent's hopes of winning will be gone too. Elsewhere in the meantime, you can see the Ecran Miners here trying to throw some blasting charges into the Graveguard with great weapons, but it's not going to cut the mustard. The Graveguard have very good melee attack against infantry with their bonus included. They've got plus 10 bonus versus infantry. They're able to just cleave through these Ecran Miners. In comes the Necrarch Lord, Dark Protection procced, and he's going to be able to get in there and dish out some hurt to these Ecran Miners and help out the Graveguard, just cleaving through them just that little bit more efficiently. And in the meantime, if we look, we can actually see that I right now have all of my Graveguards still intact. So despite the fact that I kind of accepted I was going to lose some, we've been able to retain some of our troops in the field, especially because we've removed all that skirmish power so efficiently. And now you can see these Graveguard weapons are positioning themselves for flank maneuver, for a rear charge. And my opponent at this point is reduced to just a few pockets of resistance. Obviously, his Rune Lord alongside the Norgrim's Ironbreakers is going to take all eternity to cleave through, but I've kind of just accepted that fact, and we're just going to slaughter these Ecran Miners, slowly but surely just chip away at these bad boys before finally closing with them in the long run. Now over here, the annoying Drumar Hammerfist has been trying to make himself a nuisance, so we're going to hit him with a Spear Leech again. And I actually made a bit of a misplay here. I figured that this is going to be enough to kill him, and instead the Spear Leech, keep in mind, is a bit random. All of these direct damage effects have a certain chance of failing and not doing anything, and so Drumar Hammerfist here takes like 2 or 3 ticks of damage, and then it does nothing more, so he actually survives there very effectively. And that kind of screws me over a little bit. That means that he's still alive, and he's going to be able to keep harassing me from range. That said, Bats chasing off all these poor fools, and the Bugman's Rangers have actually rallied, or sort of, I think, left them to just run away, and just bog down some Slayers here with zombies, keeping them locked out of the fray, and now sweeping back in with the Vargulfs to deal with this pocket. Because at this stage, I figured, you know what, the Bugman's Rangers do come back. Obviously, they have regen, which will be annoying. Yeah, it's going to be a pain in the rear, but you know what? I can run them down with Graveguard and Vargulfs. Right now, if I can break this pocket, that's going to be game, and that's really a much more efficient use of my resources. So that's what we're going to do. Over here, the Vargulfs are trying to beat down on the Hammerfist and kind of failing because he just has ridiculous... he's just getting knocked around in ridiculous fashion. This makes it very difficult to knock him out for good. Over there, they hit him, and you can see he actually doesn't take any damage. Now he's got entrenchment going, so he's got over 90% physical resist. I think he's up to 77% if we look here closely. 97% physical resist. He maxed out at 90, but still, he's basically invulnerable to the Vargulfs. tender administrations. In the meantime, at this point, I'm using Spirit Leech on the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers. I know that Dramar here is going to go down eventually to the Vargulfs, and I'm not wasting any more Spirit Leech shots on him, so we're going to start working on the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers. Obviously, one model at a time per tick is not the most amazing thing ever against a unit with 90 models, but hey, every little bit counts, and now we're going to start charging in with the Vargulfs. Zombie Summon is coming out to slow the annoying Slayers. And slowly but surely, this poor dwarf line is breaking. You can see here in the back line, the bats tying down the Bugman's Rangers. Obviously, they'll most likely lose in the long run, but it doesn't really matter because they're buying me time. And these Bugmans are completely sitting forgotten. My opponent just left them there. At this point, it's simply a matter of time. The Norgrimling is now to 34 models, getting overrun by Graveguard. Vargulf's just disrupting and slaughtering the attempted reinforcements here. And while the Slayers are, of course, doing their very best, another Spirit Leech on the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers, despite Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, is going to break their will to fight. And that is going to be it for the Dawi forces. At that stage, they'll reduce the Dramar as well as these annoying Slayers. And so it's just clean up an eye line at this point. The Graveguard, of course, heavily Chevron up, is going to massacre these guys. The Slayers, not terrible against infantry, obviously. They're a decent enough unit. I think they actually beat units like White Lions and whatnot. But they're just not going to be able to cut the mustard here against a horde of Graveguard. Same thing with the Ghost Ancestor. He's down to 120 HP, getting beaten down on by the Vargulf. You can actually see it does about 80 damage there. And he actually goes down, his ethereal corpse laying on the ground, because that makes sense. And we can watch the last stand of the Slayers here, surrounded by bats, surrounded by foul necromantic horrors as the Vargulf dives in and no longer caring. And these guys are fighting their last, using up their last few breaths. They're getting their head bitten off by giant bats. Really some pretty depressing stuff for the Karazhan Corps. And Pyrrhic victory for the Vampire Counts. And I think that was more of a, I think the Pyrrhic victory was mostly just because a few units were wiped out. Most of the units actually limped through that match in good shape. Now, this build I found is to be surprisingly effective against dwarves. Weirdly enough, and not just against this build, or if your opponent sort of slips up or has some weird choices, like my opponent here with the missile resist. But Great Guard's 3 weapons is surprisingly efficient against the lower Dawi cheaper units. If you Chevron them up, you get a lot of melee defense, which makes you pretty survivable. You've got some armor to tank blasting charges and that sort of thing. And of course, AP and bonus versus infantry makes you pretty lethal. Do keep in mind they've got 40 weapon strength, which is pretty insane. It's one of the higher. And with the bonus versus infantry, they're up to 50 weapon strength against infantry, which is definitely one of the highest out there. Keep in mind, greatswords, for example, are sitting at 40 with bonus included, or 41. White Lions, for example, sit at like 34. Chaos Warriors is like 38. Longbeards with great weapons, I do believe, are like 34. So most other great weapon units have pretty pitiful damage per hit in comparison to the Graveguard with great weapons. Obviously, barring units like Swordmasters or Hargadeth Executioners, or Black Orcs or something like that. Though actually, if you think about it, it's the same weapon strength as Black Orcs against infantry. So that does, I think, show how kind of strong they can be. Bats did surprisingly well here. My opponent was a little slow on the uptake with the Slayers. Now, the Slayers massacred a lot of troops, but they kept getting bogged down by zombies, kept getting bogged down by bats, and I used that opportunity to just run around with the Vargulfs, shut down, disrupt the Eastern Miners, get rid of the cannons almost immediately, run down the Bogman's Rangers and the Thunders, and that was just disastrous for my opponent. It meant that he had no real killing power. His front line was doomed to lose. The Dwarf Warriors could not win against the power of the Graveguard. And the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers, while a very potent unit, are not going to single-handedly carry your game. And at the end of it, they were just getting Spirit Leech and demolished from all sides. Personally, I think my opponent's biggest mistake here was going super heavy on shooting. Obviously, shooting is not terrible against the Vampire Counts if you're able to protect it, but if you have too much shooting, it's definitely going to be difficult to protect. So this right here, and it's not going to really even going to be possible to protect it. Because if you think about it, you got a Runesmith, and you can't even rely on his Terror as an ethereal unit to route away units. So you got him, sorry, not the Runesmith, the Engineer, who's like 1,500 or so probably gold. Then you got the 2 Bugman's Rangers, that's another 1,500. You got the 2 Cannons, that's 1,600. They actually have Chevrons, so even more. And then you got Thunders. So you're looking at like 2,300, 3,800, probably 5,300 or so gold tied up in shooting. Which means half your army is shooting. And this is not good against Vampire Counts, who are going to dumpster you if they get this opportunity, because you just do not have the width to protect yourself. At least you need to go wider with infantry. You can't bring like Norgrimlings. You got to bring like 4 units of Dwarf Warrior or Dwarf Miners or something to give yourself the width if you're going to try to go with this much DACA. But it just didn't work out. And I think that's really the biggest misplay here, barring a few questionable item or ability choices that I just don't think are worth it. I think the most important part here was just that way too much focus on shooting when you really need to cherry pick a little bit. Bring a few ranged units, sure, great, in case you need to deal with Mortis Engine or in case you need to deal with Corpse Carts, Vargulfs, whatever. You do need that shooting, but don't load up so heavily. And the other thing, you can bring great weapons in your front line against vampires. You don't have to worry about shooting, so you can bring long range great weapons, units like that. They will give you at least a slightly better performance, in my opinion. Regardless, well played to Prostagma here. Definitely was a bit of a fun match, and obviously was just experimenting. Interesting to see the Necroarch Lord Spirit Leech pretty useful against these Dwarven elites, and obviously a pretty cheap source of Winds of Magic, able to provide some constant heals in the front line, can provide those summons to disrupt the Slayers, and all in all, a decent Lord choice for sure. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it entertaining and fun. As usual, leave your comments, critiques, and questions down below. I'll do my very best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.